I always find when speaking in the afternoon, I like to get everybody to stand up and do some things, so you did that part for me. Wonderful. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Endeavor internationally in terms of connecting entrepreneurs with investors. I'll talk a little bit about venture capital and some of the things I've learned over the last 7 or 8 years helping entrepreneurs find investors. And then I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories about Endeavor entrepreneurs. Does that sound okay to you guys? Okay. Oh, and I have a clicker. And I'm going to stay down here because I saw Dave almost fall off that stage, so I'm not even going up there. One fun story about Dave, actually, before I start. I think in the last 6 or 8 months, even though we both live in San Francisco, Dave and I have only seen each other in places like Johannesburg, South Africa, and Brazil a couple weeks ago. But when I first met Dave like 3 or 4 years ago, he was giving a talk in Brazil, actually. And afterwards, one of the entrepreneurs came up to me and said, "I love Dave, he's awesome." And I said, "That's really cool, but you don't even really speak English, do you? Did you understand his talk?" He said, "No, I understand nothing, but Dave is awesome." And that's perfect, actually. If you can get a room full of people to think you're awesome and they don't even understand what you're saying, you're doing something right. I think Dave has invested in a few companies like that, actually. Okay, so I'm really excited to talk to you today. As Sati said, my name's Alan Taylor. I run Endeavor's Investor Network, and I run an office for Endeavor in California, where we work with mentors, investors, and partners to connect them all to Endeavor entrepreneurs all over the world. And really, the focus of this talk is going to be a little bit about investors, but to the point earlier about cash, this is what I'm going to talk a little bit about, is money. I'm also going to talk about what Endeavor is trying to do in the world. So in the introduction this morning, you heard a little bit about Endeavor, and what this here is our mission, right? Endeavor's a high-impact entrepreneurship movement to catalyze sustainable economic growth around the world. What does that really mean? In other words, we believe entrepreneurs can change the world. And a big part of my life over the last 8 years has been helping entrepreneurs change their companies, change their communities, and ultimately change the world by building high-growth, scalable enterprises. This is what I'm totally obsessed with. I love this. I love my job. I love working with entrepreneurs. And increasingly over the last 3 or 4 years, I've also spent a lot of time working with investors because we also believe, in addition to entrepreneurs can change the world, that investors, maybe, where do I have to click? Somewhere? Oh, sad. The clicker doesn't work. Investors can help. So investors cannot change the world by themselves, but investors can help entrepreneurs, and that's one of the reasons that we've built a lot of the programs we have over the last few years to connect entrepreneurs with the right investors. I will be better if I know, okay, here we go. So here's where Endeavor actually works. Raise your hand, actually, if you had heard of Endeavor before today. Okay, and raise your hand if you think Endeavor is brand new to you today. You never heard about it until you got here, but you think it's pretty cool. Okay, and raise your hand if you just heard about it today, but you think it's totally weird and you don't like it at all. A couple hands in the back. The guys have been asleep the whole time. Okay, so Endeavor works in emerging and growth markets. So Dave showed you a map of all the places around the world they're investing. These are all the places I work, and we work. So 300 of us on the staff full-time at Endeavor have been working with entrepreneurs for the last 15 years in all of these countries, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Africa, increasingly now in Indonesia, and Malaysia, and parts of Southeast Asia. But these are the emerging and growth markets where we really believe the growth is coming from. Here's what we actually do in all these places. And I'm going to explain just because I think understanding all of this will help to explain what the work we're doing with investors is all about. So Endeavor starts over here. I am going to go up here, even though maybe I'll get hurt. we start with screening lots and lots and lots of companies to try to find the ones we really think have high impact potential. I don't know if you guys can see all the numbers, but over the last 15 years, we've screened about 34,000 companies to select just over 500 as Endeavor entrepreneurs. What we do is dedicate tons and tons of mentorship and time to helping those companies. That's what this middle section is. We have over 3,000 mentors around the world who gave, just last year alone, 50,000 hours of mentorship. And the outcome of all of this is we are able to help these companies grow faster. And so if you look at the average growth rate, the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate of Endeavor companies, in the 2 years after they're selected, it's about 168% a year. That's the average. So they're growing pretty fast. And last year, the portfolio of companies we support did about $6 billion in revenue. So some of those have become very, very big companies in places like Brazil and Turkey and Mexico, where we've been working for a number of years. And we're really excited to have this also happen here in Indonesia. I clearly have not passed the intelligence test. I'm using the clicker, so we'll just kind of see how it goes. Here are the things that we do specifically in that category of mentorship around how to help entrepreneurs find investors. So this is my whole life. This is what my whole team in San Francisco works on. We call it smart capital because we really believe that finding the right investors for a company is what matters most. So you might think, oh, I need to raise money, I need to go out and get capital, the cash, the big pile of money is what's important. What we actually believe and what we've found over time is that when you're going to go raise capital for your business, the capital is sometimes the least important thing. The important part is what else are you going to bring into your company? What kind of expertise, what kind of skill sets, what kind of people are you going to get involved that are going to help your company really grow? So we do a lot of mentoring to that first idea up there on working with entrepreneurs about when you actually go out to raise money, what are the things you should be looking for in an investor? The second thing we do is actually make connections to investors, and I'll talk more about that. And the third thing we do, which is new, is we actually have a co-investment vehicle called Endeavor Catalyst, where we can make small co-investments ourselves only into Endeavor companies. So I put this up here because this is actually, I'm going to come back to this at the end, but these are 3 Endeavor entrepreneurs, and the kind of smiley guy with no hair on the left there is me. These are all companies we've helped raise money over the last couple of years. And I'm going to end the presentation by just telling their stories, because I think at the end of the day, real stories about real entrepreneurs who've raised money can be much more insightful and helpful than just a bunch of generic advice. You guys still with me? Okay. Raise your hand if you're asleep. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is just a very quick overview of this middle part that I talked about, connecting entrepreneurs and investors. Endeavor has been around since 1997, and we have been helping entrepreneurs ever since then with mentorship. And I started with the team in 2006. And what we realized about 2010 was we were really good at helping entrepreneurs understand how to go talk to investors and coaching them, but we were really bad at actually helping them find the investors. So in 2011, we started a program called the Endeavor Investor Network, specifically for early and seed stage investors like Dave and 500 startups, but also for bigger venture capital firms to help connect entrepreneurs who needed great partners with some of the best partners around the world from the venture capital ecosystem. What that looks like is a number of activities that we do to bring entrepreneurs and investors together. So on this you can see since April 2011, we've actually had 9 of these events convening several hundred people and making over 3,000 connections where we as Endeavor are actually bringing together the entrepreneurs, these are all Endeavor entrepreneurs, with some of the best investors. These are the investors that we work with. And so you can see they break out into a few different categories. And it's hard to read these, I'm sorry, we'll share them after, but there are strategic investors, which are more like Intel Capital or Comcast Ventures, Qualcomm Ventures. There are a number of early stage firms. This is where 500 Startups lives, and a lot of people in that chart that Dave pointed out, like Felicis Ventures or SV Angel. These are all the early stage firms. And then this is the whole world of venture capital firms, which all told on this chart, there's about 110 or 115 firms that Endeavor has been working with to connect to entrepreneurs in emerging markets. The really exciting news today is that this is actually starting to work. So over the last 3 years or so, we've been able to not only hold all these events and bring all of these entrepreneurs and investors together, but we've actually been able to help about 75 Endeavor companies from a number of these different countries all raise capital. And so these are just a few examples of companies, these are the companies in the middle, from countries that you would not expect to be able to raise venture capital, actually raising money from great investors. So Scantech is actually a hardware and software company out of Uruguay that was able to raise money from Sequoia Capital. Minha Vida is a WebMD, an online web company out of Brazil that raised money from Intel Capital. Yemek Sepeti in the middle is an online food delivery company from Turkey in the Middle East, but that actually was able to raise $44 million from General Atlantic to expand and grow their business. So when Dave is sharing and when you hear people say, well, venture capital is great if your company is in Silicon Valley, but this isn't really true for the rest of the world, there is certainly much less capital available in the rest of the world, but what Endeavor has learned and what I'm here to tell you is increasingly for the very best companies, it is possible to raise money from international investors. So all in, this got cut off on the bottom, but over the last 2.5 years, about 75 Endeavor companies have raised just over $300 million in equity. So some of the things I'm going to share with you guys, it's directly kind of my experience of helping those companies raise money. Now, these things are not easy. And the first thing I tell entrepreneurs is, if you want to raise money from Uruguay, we can try to do this together, but you will be the first one ever, because it has never happened before. And that was true for Scantech. And in Scantech's case, it took 9 years between when he first told me he was going to raise money in Silicon Valley and when he actually became the first investment for Sequoia Capital. Now, part of that was Silicon Valley had to get ready for Latin America. They weren't ready when he first wanted to do it. So we have had tremendous success in helping companies raise money, but I do not want to give you the false impression that, oh, this is easy and this will happen tomorrow in Indonesia, because it won't. But for very, very exceptional companies, it is possible to do this as venture capital begins to think more globally. So this is the idea of what is venture capital anyway? How many of you guys have actually spoken to somebody who at least called himself or herself a venture capitalist? Raise your hand if you've had a conversation with somebody who thinks he's a venture capitalist. Okay. Most likely that person is not a venture capitalist. Because here's the problem. My fiance is a medical doctor. If you want to be a medical doctor, you have to go to medical school and be trained and receive a whole bunch of certificates and time. It turns out if you want to be a venture capitalist, you just go to the store, print yourself a business card that says venture capitalist, and then you go start telling people you're a venture capitalist. It's very hard sometimes to tell the difference between someone who is excited about entrepreneurs and self-identifies as a VC, someone who actually has the track record and the mentality of investing in that way. So just a couple quick slides on, what is venture capital? It's this very specialized asset class of private equity. These are just logos of venture capital firms, so don't worry about it. But it's very focused on funding and building early stage, high growth enterprises. And there's lots of great information available on the internet kind of talking more about what is venture capital and how does this all work. But I wanted to just quickly share with you guys a few guidelines. So this is not my chart. I borrowed it from a friend in the US, but basically if you look at this, investing goes through lots of different stages, and Dave was talking about the same thing. Bootstrapping in the beginning is when you're doing this yourself, through friends and family, or sometimes they call that friends, family, and fools, the 3 Fs, who can invest in your company early on, through angel investments, and then into venture capital and growth equity. One thing that's really important to think about, and it's one of the lessons I'm going to share at the very end, is that raising money is oftentimes a multi-step process through a lot of different rounds. So if you decide to go the route of engaging professional investors in your company, you are very likely going to do this several times over the course of several years. And this is a rough timeline of how oftentimes it can happen. Okay, where do VCs invest? I think this is important. This chart is actually about 2 years old, and so it's a little less true than it was at one time, but the top category here is really all tech businesses, right? Information technology and IT businesses, and they're all famous logos of companies you know. Another category of investment for venture capital in the United States is life sciences. So there are lots of investments into healthcare and life science type businesses, and we did see over the past decade a lot of investment in clean tech. But what you don't see is lots of other businesses that you guys might be running and leading. So it's important to emphasize Endeavor works with all kinds of companies, but when it comes to helping companies raise money, we understand that venture capital is a very specific asset class focused on a very specific set of companies. So if you're not running a business in one of these areas, it's quite possible that you're going to need to figure out how to finance that company from some other venue, right? And there's lots of great ways to finance a company. You know, the best way is probably getting money from your customers, right? Figuring out how do we sell things that actually make this business profitable. But thinking about debt, thinking about other equity options besides venture can be very, very helpful. Okay, just a couple of quick slides on where does this happen, because we talk a lot about Silicon Valley. If you look at all the venture capital invested in the United States, just over half of it is in California. There's a lot of it in New York and Boston, and there's quite a bit of it in a few other markets as well. Now, if you take this globally, however, what about the rest of the world? Up until about 3 or 4 years ago, venture capital really only happened in 5 places in the world. The United States, a little bit in Europe, China, India, and Israel. And that was it. And I don't use a lot of charts, but this chart actually shows the big blue bar is the U.S., right? So the U.S. is most of the venture capital money in the world is being spent in the United States. A little bit in Europe, that's the gray, and then Israel, China, and India. Oh, and there's a tiny bit, I think, in Canada, but I consider Canada the U.S., so apologies to the Canadians in the room. Over the last 2 years, we've actually started to see these nascent venture capital ecosystems start to form in places like Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Istanbul, Turkey, and a couple of other cities. And that's something that Endeavor is very, very excited about. But it's important to understand the history that, you know, traditionally venture capital has only happened in a few places in the whole world. So this is in direct conflict with this idea of our map, right? So Endeavor works in all these places. You'll notice this is not the United States, Europe, China, India, or Israel. These are all the other markets around the world. So a few years ago, when I first moved to Silicon Valley, which was in 2010, and I started to tell all the investors there about the great work that we were doing. There we go. So 4 years ago in Silicon Valley, when I would tell people about the companies we had in all of these markets, usually they looked kind of like this. They were confused. And if they didn't look like this, actually they looked more like this. They were worried, right? These were markets they did not know or understand. So 2 really exciting things have happened in the last 4 years. One is some investors in Silicon Valley have started to become more open to the rest of the world. And 500 Startups is a great example. Other thing is some of these ecosystems have started to form their own local players, right? So people based in markets who have the relationships and the know-how and the networks and the understanding have started to embrace venture capital and this style of investing, which is really exciting. So the good news is a lot has changed in 4 years. So just a couple of quick notes on why to raise venture capital, and then I'll get to the stories and wrap up. This is actually a slide I borrowed from a friend named Jeff Busgang, who's a venture capitalist in Boston, and wrote a actually really great book about venture capital that I recommend. But I wanted to share it, and this is exactly the way he presents it, because if you notice, cash, the actual money, is the last thing on the list. So why raise venture capital? For guidance and support for the people that can help your company, for access, for the folks that those people will know, for credibility. But the actual money comes way down on the list, and you think, well, that's sort of weird. Why is that like that? Why would a venture capitalist say that? But the true practitioners of this really do believe that it's all about helping a company and backing a company, and that the cash itself is just a secondary part of the transaction. So these are typical investment criteria. Again, I didn't make these up. This comes from lots of the VCs we work with, but people will ask me, well, what are VCs really looking for? And again, VC is a very specific kind of industry and a specific set of things that they're trying to find, but they're looking for a very big market. They're looking for an unfair advantage that you have. Why you? Why now? They're looking for a really attractive business model or technology, and those are the tangible parts. They're also really looking for the intangible things, right? So your ability as a leader and the chemistry that you have as a team. And the last thing listed here I think is really interesting, and you hear VCs say this over and over again in different ways. It says movie, not a snapshot, or sometimes they will say lines, not dots. But essentially the idea is most great investors are not going to invest in your company the first time they meet you. No matter how amazing you are, they're going to feel much more comfortable if they had met you 2 years ago, saw you again a year ago, saw you again 6 months ago, and now when you come to them to raise money, they have a line. They have a movie they can follow. It's not a single dot. It's not a single data point. And that's just human nature and human intuition. But over and over again, that's what VCs tell us about investing in a lot of the markets where Endeavor's working, is that they really need to start to understand that market or understand some companies from there, way ahead of time, 18 to 24 months before they're going to write their first check, because they really are comfortable investing in lines, not dots. Okay, so back to these guys and a couple of stories. So the people pictured here are Raul from Scantech, who's an Endeavor entrepreneur from Uruguay, Martin Migoya, the CEO of Globant, which is an Endeavor company from Argentina, and Daniel from Minha Vida, which is an Endeavor company from Brazil. 2 minutes. Okay. I will tell very fast stories. Basically, I wrote on the top of this slide, forget everything else, remember this. Because I realize that when you have a presentation like this, you can't remember all this stuff. So here's 3 things you should remember. Raising smart capital is about a lot more than just money. And the story of that middle guy, Martin from Globant, really illustrates this. This is a company based in Argentina that when we started working with them 6 years ago had about 100 employees. Today they have over 4,000 employees, and they've actually filed to go public in the US. But the really key thing that they have, besides the support of Endeavor over that time, is the support of the right investors who they brought into the company. So they've raised over $30 million in venture and growth equity to help fund this company, but it's not as much about the money as about the people that they brought into the business to help them grow. Another one that I think is really important, it's not winning the lottery. So raising money is very likely something that you will do more than once if you decide to go down that path. Basically, this is the idea that, a lot of entrepreneurs think, I have to go raise money, raising money is so important, and once they get it, they're done. That's actually not true at all. Once you've raised your first round of money, most likely you've set yourself on a path and a growth trajectory that you're going to do that at least 2 or 3 more times over the course of the growth of your business. That's what this chart was all about. And then really quickly here, just to wrap up, the last thing is, forget everything else, remember, it's actually a lot like marriage, so choose very wisely. Once you bring outside investors into your business, they're a partner that are with you forever, or for a very long time. It's very hard to undo that part. So we really do encourage you, if you are going to seek raising outside capital, to think very, very carefully about why you want a partner and what you want that partner to bring to the table, and then go find the right partner. And so I think you can make 1 minute. Okay, all kinds of dating analogies, but I think that's the idea. Okay, that's the end. I put this slide in after this morning about the hard-hitting questions, so if you have any really hard-hitting questions, I am ready, and thank you very much.